Great. Thank you all for joining today and welcome to our webinar on developing your HR strategy. I'm excited that People Solutions Center is able to sponsor these free webinars along with Veritable Screening. And we've partnered together on several of these presentations now to bring you HR information and background check information that really makes it easy for you to gather the kind of background and pieces that you need in order to run your organization, and particularly the people side of your organization, with confidence. We hope you get a lot of detail from these presentations, and we're always available to answer any questions you may have. Today, my name is Katie Magoon. I'm the owner of People Solutions Center. We are an HR consulting firm in the St. Louis area, but have clients across the country where we support their HR needs, whether they have in-house HR and just need some additional capacity, or for organizations that don't have HR, we help build these HR strategies and implement them for our clients. Today, we're going to talk about your HR strategies and really help you figure out how do you best ensure that at the end of the day, you have a 3-year HR plan so that you can move from a point where you may often feel that you spend your days from a people perspective simply putting out fires and running around with, I love this picture with a fire extinguisher. We all feel that way on some days. But instead, we come about our people strategies as though we have just a nice walk through the woods, a path that we plan to follow that has long-term goals. And sometimes when we do get pulled off course from the firefighting every day, we at least know where we want to get back to and how we plan to move forward to move through this forest that can often feel overwhelming from a people side of the house. Today, we're going to walk you through a very straightforward approach to these people strategies and figuring out what's the right order for you to work on these strategies, and most importantly, how do all of these pieces tie together. For those of you who I've not met in person, as I said, my name is Katie Magoon, and I've done human resources consulting for the last 3.5 years on my own, but I have 20 years of overall HR experience in my background. 12 of those were with Progressive Insurance as their recruiting director, which is actually where I also met the owner of Veritable Solutions, John Sperry, and he and I have partnered together in our current endeavors from a background check perspective and the human resources side of the house. For the next hour, I'd love to take this opportunity to really act as your HR director, the person in your organization that walks you through how to build your people strategies and how to go about figuring out where to spend your appropriate time and how to get these pieces done when you may be a smaller organization or a smaller HR organization at minimum, and you've got a lot of things on your plate. So if this is what it feels like when I say HR strategy, where you've got a lot of lines going in different directions, you have a lot on your to-do list, but no clear picture as to where your strategy is taking you, then this presentation is going to help you figure out how do we go from this type of a maze to a clear path that allows us to move forward the people side of the organizations that you work in every day. The first step to building your HR strategy, like most strategy work, is to step back and complete your SWOT analysis. This really is an overview of what is stepping back, looking at the forest for the trees, and figuring out what are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for the organization, particularly as it relates to the people side of the house. The strengths, what do you do really well? What are the things about the organization that your people love? What are the HR practices, policies, and processes that are going really well and support your mission in terms of how you want your work environment to operate on a daily basis? Your weaknesses are those things that you know just aren't really working the way people want them to work or aren't getting you the results. You're still seeing turnover because of these types of things, or you're slower to fill the recruiting roles that you have open because you have these weaknesses in your approach to human resources. Your opportunities are those things that are out there out ahead of you that if you were able to capitalize on, it could move you and the organization forward much more quickly. It's really what I view as if you could build the vision of what you would want the organization to look like, what are the things that if you could capture and really do well would move you forward even faster? And then most importantly, your threats. What are the potential obstacles that are in front of you that could keep you from reaching those goals? Or what are the pieces of the external market that could influence the outcomes that you'd like to achieve? For example, for many organizations right now, one of the key threats, while it's great for the economy, the very low unemployment rate is a threat for many organizations that are trying to grow. Because if they cannot find the quality people that they need, their growth is stunted. And so we have to think about the fact that a continuing unemployment rate that might continue to go down, while is great for the economy, may actually pose a threat for our organization. And we need to come up with ways to overcome those threats. The idea behind building a strategy is that we step back and actually just make a list of what are all of the things that fall into these 4 buckets. And then once we have this list and this analysis of how the organization is doing today, we start to think about what are the actions we would take to leverage our strengths, improve our weaknesses, take advantage of the opportunities ahead of us, and most importantly, overcome our obstacles or make sure that we have plans should one of those threats come to fruition. The key is this takes just a little bit of time. It does not take that much opportunity, but you do need to set aside time. I typically suggest that clients take around 2 hours to just step back and really brainstorm what falls into each of these 2 categories. You all likely know your organization well enough that you know all of these pieces, but just taking time and setting aside the opportunity to look at the forest through the trees can make a huge difference as to what those strategies and plans might look like. This is the difference between fighting the fire every day and stepping back and really finding that path through the forest that allows you to know where you're going and where to spend your time. There's 3 different areas that I suggest that individuals look at when they're trying to build their HR strategy. The first piece is compliance. If we don't have all of the compliance pieces taken care of, you really can't get to what I call kind of the fun and sexier and cooler part of human resources, the things that really allow you to achieve your business objectives and your business goals. Because you'll always have these issues on the compliance side that create obstacles for you. And so we really need to make sure we have this piece under our belt. The second piece is your foundational HR practices. These are the processes and practices and policies that happen every single day that you need to assess how well they're working and determine what work needs to be done in order to get these in an operational order that allows you to get through some of the necessary pieces that go along with human resources. The third piece, though, is really the cool, fun, sexy stuff. Once you have compliance and foundational HR practices in place, now you can start to really think outside of the box and really take your strategy to the next level. Implement things that will not just ensure you don't lose folks or ensure you don't get sued or ensure that you have your seats filled, but instead it takes it to the next level to think about how could we get the top quality candidate? How can we make sure that our folks are not just staying longer, but they're engaged on a daily basis? How do you really take these people and harness the energy and the passion of the wonderful folks you have and ensure that it's part of and tied to the mission every single day? We're going to walk through each of these 3 areas and give you examples of the kinds of things that you want to be considering as you're doing your SWOT analysis in each of these 3 buckets. By following this practice and this process, you'll be able to walk away understanding your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in compliance, foundational HR practices, and then if you're ready for it, all the way into HR excellence. And that's really where you start thinking about what does that 3 to 5 year plan look like, not just the 1 to 3 year plan. So let's take a moment to start talking about what this looks like in each of the different categories and what kinds of things you need to consider. Compliance is where we start. Compliance are the pieces that if you don't have in place from the beginning, all of the foundational HR practices, all of the HR, you can't even get to HR excellence, but it starts to fall apart without these pieces in place. So you need to step back and ask yourself, this is just a short checklist. There are additional things to think about, but these are really the core things that you need to figure out from an HR perspective. Do I have compliance taken care of? The first one is your employee handbook. Do you have an employee handbook? And if you do, has somebody taken a look at it in the last 18 months? And that somebody can mean a lot of different things. First and foremost, if you are in either the owner role or the HR role, have you looked at your own employee handbook in the last 18 months? One of the most common things I find with employee handbooks isn't necessarily whether or not they have all the legal stuff covered, but really more of, oh yeah, that's in our handbook, but that's not what we do. Anytime you have an employee handbook that has information in it that you then are turning around to new hires or individuals that ask questions and say, oh yeah, that's in there, but it's wrong, you've now undermined your entire employee handbook. Even as something as small that it says, we have weekly staff meetings, and you've discontinued the process of having weekly staff meetings, you've now sent a signal to your employees that they have a reference tool ahead of them, but they should ignore it because it's not accurate. Should you ever be in a situation where you do have a court case brought against you, and the question comes up, can I see your employee handbook? And you now give that to the attorney, but you say, but ignore this section, and this section, the response is going to be, how would an employee know which things they should pay attention to? So when you're thinking about whether or not anybody's reviewed your employee handbook, you need to think about, is it accurate? Does it reflect what we actually do? And then the second piece of it is it legally up to date? Our employment laws change on a frequent basis. You need to know whether or not all of the legal components are in there. And also just, is it really useful? Does it help take your culture to the next level? And does it explain your culture to a new hire? Your federal posters. Do you know where your federal and state employment posters are? And do you have them up to date? Think about your office space, think about where these are, and ask yourself, maybe if you need to go find them, make sure that those are out. Job descriptions are another really critical part of compliance. And here's why job descriptions matter. Job descriptions aren't just about the legal side of it, although that's really important. But until you have job descriptions, you can't start to do all the things that you want to do in HR foundational practices. It impacts your ability to write job ads, which impacts your ability to recruit. From a compliance perspective, well-written job descriptions allow you to better administer your FMLA programs, deal with ADA situations that may come up. You also, on the foundational tools perspective, a really good coaching program or talent management program cannot start without first having job descriptions in place. Because how can I coach you if we haven't even aligned on what you're supposed to do day in and day out? And how do we use that tool, not as a piece of paper that sits and collects cobwebs in your desk, but instead as an ongoing point of conversation? Have you completed harassment training? Again, from a compliance perspective, there are a couple of states that have passed laws in the last 2 years. As a result of the Me Too movement, they've passed laws that require this. It is not all states, but I can tell you whether your state requires it or not, this is just a best practice at this stage. We really thought people had figured out how to treat each other at work. But what we're learning is we got really lax in this space, and people forgot that there are some basic things that you need to do to make sure you're protecting your employee culture and ensuring people have a great place to work. Your job descriptions align with whether or not you have your FLSA exemptions accurately placed. This comes down to the question of exempt or non-exempt. You need to make sure you've applied this appropriately. It's probably the most common mistake I find when I do HR diagnostics for organizations is that individuals have misinterpreted the rules around exempt and non-exempt and therefore don't have their FLSA piece taken care of. This is a costly one if you get this wrong, so you really want to make sure you've got compliance taken care of. But even more importantly than the cost, I will tell you employees don't understand the Fair Labor Standards Act, and therefore they're confused. And if you can't answer those questions correctly, then it will lead to turnover and frustration, because if they're confused, they may assume that they're not being treated the way that they should. Take a look at your I-9 forms and make sure they're accurately completed. This is a basic compliance piece, but I do find probably at least 1 out of every 6 of the diagnostics that I do for clients, I find that individuals aren't completing their I-9 forms correctly or aren't storing them correctly. Let's talk about the next piece. Sorry, my slide got stuck. So let's talk about foundational HR practices. Actually, before I jump into that, I do want to give, since we just talked compliance, and like I said, we've got a perfect size group here for questions in between. Does anyone have any questions on some of those examples of compliance situation things that you might want to go back and take a look at? Okay. I'll keep going. If you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat section. I am watching that. I'll circle back to it. For those of you who maybe just joined us too, if you wouldn't mind making sure that your phone is on mute, that would be fantastic as well. So let's talk about foundational HR practices and what those look like. As we think about the life cycle of an employee, it's important to think through the fact that every single touch point you have with an employee makes an impact on whether or not an employee loves the organization and is fully engaged or is thinking about where they can go next. And in this kind of unemployment market where folks can go find the next job, it's really important that we have an employee life cycle that supports the employee experience on a day-to-day basis. This slide shows you kind of beginning to end all of the different touch points that you may want to think through as you consider your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of your employee life cycle. So let's start with workforce planning. This one is key because if you don't have a good understanding of what your organization may look like 3 years out, it's really hard to understand what you need to do to be prepared for it. So thinking through on a regular basis, do you have a way to have line of sight to understand how many people you will hire over the course of a year and by which job title? Now, in some organizations, the growth can still be at an unpredictable rate, and it's a little hard to do this. But even having a starting point, even if the number changes, knowing the number up front is really helpful to your organization from an HR strategy perspective. I'll give you an example from my own experience of knowing that a department, even when I was in a large organization, knowing that a department planned on hiring 10 people in a year, put me in a situation where I built the plan for 10 people. Now, if they came back and said, I only need 8, my plan for 10 still works, so I'm good. But if they come back and say, you know what, I need 20, I'm still sitting in a better position because at least I had a plan for 10, and I can figure out if I can scale that plan to 20 or if I need to add on to the plan. But if I never knew the starting number, then I'm really winging it from beginning to end. And now when I need 20, I didn't even have a plan for 10, so I don't know how I'm going to get there. So making sure that your HR organization and your HR folks really know how many people you anticipate hiring, even if it's just an estimate, can absolutely make a difference in their ability to be ready and to go when you start to grow. The second piece you want to look at in your employee life cycle is your employment branding and recruiting. These are a couple of key questions that you want to ask yourself along the way to really evaluate whether or not your branding and your recruiting is working for you. The last question here about a positive candidate experience. This is one of the most critical things an organization can do. And I will be honest with you, it's the piece that most often gets forgotten. So if you think about the last couple of candidates you hired, ask yourself, did they receive responses in the time frame that they would have expected? Was it easy for them to get through the interview process in terms of the logistics? Did people call them back when they should have? Did they sit and wait for 2 or 3 weeks in between interviews? Did they have to call you to get updates, or was somebody proactively reaching out to them? And you might ask yourself, you know what impact does that have? Like, they should be happy they got a job. The reality is we are not in a space where we can assume that people should just be happy that they got a job. Instead, what we want is really excited and passionate, engaged employees on day one so that they never wonder whether or not they should keep looking because they might not be treated well as an employee. So in today's world of a low unemployment rate, and most importantly, where engagement matters, not just butts and seats, It's really important that you look at your recruiting process from the lens of the candidate and think about whether or not that experience has them walking in the door thinking, this is a great place to work because I got treated fabulously as a candidate. I can only imagine what they do for their employees. Or are they walking in the door asking themselves, yeah, I'll wait and see how this goes, but they better be better with their employees than they were with me before I got hired. Making sure you've got a good process in place, or if you don't have capacity for this, looking for alternative ways to get your recruiting process handled can be really important. The other piece to this is your interview guides, because this falls right into candidate experience. Do your managers know what to ask? Is what they're asking legal? And more importantly, are they asking questions that really help them know whether or not they're hiring the right person? Once you find the perfect person, onboarding is critical. Think to all the jobs you've had in your career and all the different places you've worked. What did that first day look like? Was it consistent from one person to the next? Did somebody get stuck in a conference room for an entire day watching videos or reading their handbook or looking through PowerPoint slides? Or was it engaging and help them get introduced to the culture of the organization and help them meet the people that they will work with? So take a look and do an evaluation of your onboarding process. Make sure it covers a good 6-month span. What can this person expect to see day 1, week 1, first month, by the 3rd month, and most importantly, by the 6th month, and what check-in points are in there along the way. Development and performance management. This is where you start to keep your employees engaged. Are they getting coached on a regular basis? And do they like the process by which they're getting coaching? There is a ton of data out there that says that over half of your managers hate giving performance evaluations, and over 70% of your employees think they're useless. When you think about that kind of an HR process, half of the people hate doing it, and 70% of the people don't even think it's doing any good. You probably aren't getting what you need out of your coaching program. We've worked with several clients, and when I first started considering these options as an HR person, it went against every bone in my body to say these words, and now I will tell you, best thing ever. Throughout your performance evaluations, get rid of them. Stop doing performance evaluations and start having coaching conversations. It's not about the document, it's about the discussion. If your folks are walking away from their performance evaluations not really understanding what they need to do to get better, or why they're not being successful, or most importantly, how do they get ahead, then you probably aren't taking an approach to this that's working for them, and your managers probably don't really love them. So think about new and different ways. There's a lot of good options for how you make that happen. One of the examples that we've put in place with several clients now is something as simple as regular discussions, and then start figuring out how to communicate the answers to 3 really key questions. What should this person start doing, stop doing, and continue doing? And depending on your culture and your approach and some of the processes you need, there's a lot of different things you can do to accomplish those conversations, but it makes a huge difference in terms of how your people react to these discussions. Next, take a look at your compensation practices. Do you have something that you would consider, this is our comp philosophy? If an employee comes to you and says, I want a raise, do you have a good answer for them? Can you explain why they're getting paid what they're getting paid, and why either they deserve the raise or it doesn't make sense in terms of their current situation? Most importantly, do you have a practice in place that makes sure an employee never has to come to you and ask for the raise? They may come to you and say, look, I have another offer and here's what it is. But an organization that has a set of practices where the only way you're getting a raise is if you get up the nerve to ask for it is probably not going to have success this day and age in retaining their employees. There is an expectation that if I am a good employee, there is some sort of a process to follow that determines whether or not I should be getting a raise or a bonus or whatever the compensation piece is. When people are in the dark, they make assumptions that it's just not going to happen. The other piece you want to look at is whether or not your benefits plans are competitive. Do you offer medical, dental, vision? If so, how much does the employee pay versus the employer? Is the coverage good? Can they get the care that they need? And most importantly, one of the newest options is this full set of supplemental plans can be a way that even for a small business, even if you can't pay for the medical premiums for your employees because you're just too small, there are options around supplemental benefits that come at no cost to the employer, but can do a ton in terms of taking care of your employees and making sure that they're protected from the risk that can come from not having a strong medical plan. Also looking at other benefits, wellness programs, opportunities for individuals to take paid time off versus the older vacation and sick time plans, what benefits come with that, and why do people perceive those as such better outcomes. The last two touch points that I think are really important to talk about here are exit interviews. So if you're losing people, do you know why? The exit interview is also an opportunity to talk to individuals to understand, are they likely to come back? So if your top performer leaves, sometimes we can't keep it from happening, but we can certainly manage the relationship in a way that allows for, if they go to the new employer and find out the new employer doesn't have such a great HR strategy and they want to come back, you've kept that relationship going. The last piece of all of this employee life cycle process is really evaluating your HR technology. And you might think, what does HR technology have to do with how people are feeling every day? The reality is good HR technology underlines all of these processes. And if you don't have good technology in place, then the processes are clunky. It's difficult for an employee to just update their direct deposit or to change their address or to apply for a job as a candidate. If all of that is difficult, then it impacts the experience that they have throughout their employee life cycle. The other reason your HR technology matters is sometimes it just signals that you care as an employer. I'll give you a perfect example, and one of my referral partners on the IT side of the house shared this with me as something that's happening from a cybersecurity perspective. And I'm not kidding you, 2 weeks after he told me, I actually had it happen myself within the organization, thankfully, because he shared. I already knew to expect it. There is a phishing scam out there, an email phishing scam. In this phishing scam, the individual in your organization who's responsible for updating direct deposit, because perhaps you don't have an HR technology that allows for employees to do it themselves. These folks are getting into your system, they're watching these patterns, and they recognize who the individual is that would be responsible for that. The phishing email then goes to the payroll person, and it looks like one of your employees, and it has a document attached that says, please update my direct deposit information. If the person receiving that email does not catch that it is a phishing scam, they update the direct deposit, and now that employee's paycheck does not go into their bank account, it goes into some random bank account of an individual who now has your money. From an employee perspective, this is a really horrible thing to have happen to one of you, because even if you got it figured out and get them paid, it's a scary experience. So one of the ways you can take care of your employees is to ensure that there's never an email going around that has name change, direct deposit, anything with their social security number on it. None of that should be received from an email perspective. Instead, put in place an HR technology. Typically through your payroll company, they have these available, so employees can do all of this self-service. It's a really simple process piece, but if you don't have this in place, it needs to be at minimum on your weakness list and possibly on your threat list, because it could create some cybersecurity risks for you. Those are the pieces as you think about your employee life cycle where these foundational HR tools really make a difference when you're evaluating. So when you're doing your SWOT analysis, you want to think about, how am I doing on all of these different questions? I'm going to pause there here again for a second and check in. Does anybody have any questions on the pieces that we consider HR foundational practices? Okay, we'll go ahead and keep going. There will be time at the end as well. If you still have questions, we'll be good to go. So the next piece that we're going to step into is really talking about how do you even evaluate where you stand on these foundational practices. Is this you just sit in a room and kind of brainstorm that yourself? How do you get other people's opinions? First of all, I will tell you just the power of you sitting in the room and thinking about this and looking at the forest for the trees will make a big difference in your strategy. So take the time to do that. Like I said, probably an hour, maybe hour and a half to 2 hours of just sitting with flip charts in front of you will make all of the difference to getting you to think the right way. But you may need to reach out and gather input from others as well. And here are a couple of ways that we've done this for clients. First of all is focus groups. Ask your employees and your managers, what about your HR policies, practices, and processes are working well for them and what's not? Also ask them, what about your policies perhaps supports the kind of culture that you want? And what are the things about your policies that might actually be unknowingly distracting from that piece? I'll give an example. Had a client years ago that they actually had, from a policy perspective, they had HR policies in place, but they didn't have an employee handbook. Even though they called it a handbook, they really didn't have an employee handbook. Instead, they had a series of 56 individual policies that went out on a regular basis. So once a year as an employee, every time a policy was a year old, you got an email that said you need to reread this HR policy. And you had 30 days to read that policy. So on any given day, I might get a new email that said I needed to read a new policy. And if I didn't hit the 30-day mark, then I was out of compliance. So I was always getting emails about having to read my quote unquote employee handbook. It was overwhelming for employees. They didn't actually tend to read each individual policy. They simply opened it and scrolled down it for the amount of time it needed to for the system to recognize that they were actually thinking about reading it. And then they did a DocuSign, but they didn't actually pay attention to what was in there. The second piece of it was at the end of that, if you missed the 30-day deadline, they had put a policy in place that says if you're ever out of compliance in reading your policies, you don't get your annual bonus. So here they built a practice that was overwhelming and stressful for their employees. And if you missed any one of those policies throughout the course of the year, you also lost your bonus. They wanted a culture where people were really excited and engaged to be there, and yet their employee handbook was deterring from that happening. The only way we got that information, they really did not realize that this was overwhelming to their folks, but in focus groups, this came out time and time again. And the simple fix we put in place was we put all of the policies together in one employee handbook. They signed the whole thing once a year, and we were done. We also got rid of some of the policies that didn't align with our culture, but all of it came out of these focus group conversations because it's little nit-nat stuff you might be doing that you're not recognizing. Candidate experience surveys can be extremely helpful. This is actually sending a survey. It can be something, it does not have to be an expensive way to do it. Use SurveyMonkey. Send a 5-question survey to the candidates that you touch and ask them the questions, what was your experience like? Would you refer a friend based on your experience? How would you rate our communication? How would you rate your interview experience? Get the feedback so that you can fix the part of your processes that aren't working very well. Hiring manager surveys are same thing on the flip side. So if you are a recruiting organization supporting your managers, find out how your managers feel about the process itself. New hire surveys can be helpful in terms of giving you information on your onboarding process. And then exit interviews are a fabulous way to just see from beginning to end what's happening with your employee process. I'm going to stop for just a second. I do have a question here. So one of the questions that just came in, should you need to update the handbook every year? I have heard, advice I hear from attorneys is at minimum every 12 to 18 months, you need to look at your handbook because the employment laws are changing frequently enough. If you are in one of the states like California, New York, New Jersey, Illinois is starting to border on this fringe too in terms of the rate with which they're implementing employment laws. I would say yes, absolutely every 12 months, 18 months at the longest. And the reason for the 18 months is, certainly laws change, so you want to make sure you're legally compliant. 2, every 18 months, you may have grown, so new laws might apply to you that didn't apply to you previously. And then most importantly, sometimes we adjust processes along the way and we forget in the implementation of the new process or even the new practice because of a new leader, we forget to go back and update the handbook. And so now you have pieces of your handbook that are just inaccurate. So my recommendation is every 12 to 18 months. Great. Thank you for the question, by the way. Again, folks, as we're going, feel free to type those into the chat section if that's easy for you. I can see those as they come in and I'll pop in and answer them. All right, from an HR excellence perspective, once you get compliance and your foundational tools down, then you really get to think about how do we make this the really cool place to work? This is the cool kids section, right? Like, how do you take it all to the next level? When you start thinking about these things, oftentimes people are like, I don't even know what that would look like. So we're going to spend a little time giving you some thoughts around what falls into this cool kid bucket, so that if you are in, even if you think, you know what, I've got about a year's worth of project work to get all my foundational stuff cleaned up, then where would I go? The other reason it's important to think about HR excellence as you're doing your SWOT analysis is sometimes we get so bogged down in, oh my God, I have so much compliance stuff to do, or geez, I don't like our coaching process. So when we're building our strategy, we only focus on that piece that's in front of us. When you're doing your SWOT analysis, you want to take a moment to step back and think bigger than just that. Thinking in terms of these HR excellence pieces it may still be in the same bucket. Maybe you do need to overhaul your coaching processes. Maybe you do need to put a better recruiting process in place. But do you just put one in place that just hits compliance? Or do you put one in place that's game changing in terms of your ability to attract and retain the right talent? So if we don't think about these HR excellence items, even when we're still stuck in compliance issues to solve, we may not think big enough picture to really get the right kind of strategy that we want. So what does it mean to have HR excellence? HR excellence strategies allow your HR programs and policies and practices to not just be compliant, but to align with your business initiatives. What's coming from a business perspective? What's happening on the growth side or strategy side of the business that if you could address that from an HR perspective, would help that go even better, would help the actual numbers and bottom line results of the organization? What business challenges may be coming from a growth perspective that you as HR can be a part of solving? I had a client that we just took through an HR strategy session, and what was interesting is as we talked about it, their compliance world was actually in really good shape from an HR perspective. They even had a pretty good set of foundational HR tools. Their strategy was feeling pretty good. Further into the conversation, we started discussing what's happening in your organization over the next 3 years that could impact or change the way you do things today, or even better, you might be able to initiate the change in a positive direction. What they said was that there was a possibility that they would be moving their office. And sometimes that's not that big of a deal. It might just be some extra lifting on the HR side, but not a big problem. The challenge was where this office was located and where the possibility of where they might move based on a merger or an acquisition that was going to happen meant the difference in drive time for at least 60% of their employee population of an additional 30 to 35 minutes. That's a game changer. That's a potential threat. And it's in a traffic pattern from a city perspective where if you're one of the Clevelanders, the east side, west side, if you're one of my St. Louis folks, you know people don't cross the bridge. It was game changing in terms of whether or not most of their employees would even have followed that traffic pattern and be willing to move with the organization. So as we were building this SWOT analysis, their strategy was looking pretty straightforward. And suddenly here came this threat that ended up in our SWOT analysis that changed absolutely where we spent our time and our prioritization of the rest of the action plan. Those are the kinds of business challenges you need to have on your radar. Other things that hit HR excellence are things that impact the bottom line and really get people to not just, I go to work every day, but they engage their employees and they bring people and they rally people around the mission of the organization. Some examples of HR strategies are things like employee engagement surveys, leadership assessments, and team development. I just did a really cool program with clients with a new client yesterday. We're taking them through the five dysfunctions of a team. So if any of you have read that book, there's a workshop, a series of workshops that you can do in addition to that that allow the team members to assess their own work in the 5 behaviors: trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, and results. They assess their current ability. It gives them activities and exercises to do to help improve their abilities in each of the 5 behaviors. It also includes DISC assessments. These are the kinds of things, I mean, it was fun to watch these 13 team members have meaningful conversations about how their styles were impacting how they worked, increasing the level of trust. And then we wrapped the day with a great conversation that turned out about something as basic as their Monday morning status meeting. And what could they do to improve that? Because it wasn't working for everybody. So starting Monday morning next week, they've got a new plan for their meeting so that they're getting more out of it. That's HR excellence. And those are the kinds of things that you're doing to really make sure you're driving business results. Employee development programs, what are you doing to coach and mentor? And not just coach and mentor in the current role, but what systems in place, what processes do you have in place to get people ready for the next role, for a role that maybe they don't even realize could be a role. But what does that look like going forward so that there are means for individuals to get that kind of information? And the last piece is succession planning. Have you identified who your key employees are? And if they left tomorrow, what would you do? Would you backfill the job the same way? Do you have somebody ready internally? If you would structure the role differently, do you have talent ready for the new way that you would structure that role? These kinds of ideas and concepts, again, stretch your thinking a little bit further when you're doing that SWOT analysis to envision 3 to 5 years down the road so that we can build a plan that gets you where you want to go so we don't get stuck in the firefighting. Other examples of HR excellence strategies are wellness programs. Again, these help engage employees, retain employees, and they help master your benefits costs. What are your rewards and recognition plans, your employment branding strategies, and your continuity planning? If everything went down tomorrow, how would you get back into business as quickly as possible? So we finished the SWOT analysis. We now have flip charts in front of you that give you your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. Now, what do you do with it? The next piece is to think through what actions would we take, what would we have to implement to leverage our strengths, improve on our weaknesses, take advantage of our opportunities, and ensure that if one of those threats happens, we've got a way to handle it. Once you come up with the action plans that you would want to take over the next 1 to 3 years, the key is to go through and prioritize them. There's 3 buckets I always think about when I think about prioritization. First of all is what I call sort of the Batman POW. What are things that you can just knock out? Just get it done. The example that I talked about with the employee handbook, like just getting that thing from 52 policies into a single handbook made game-changing difference in terms of the level of engagement and excitement of their employees. We removed stress from their lives instantaneously. It took less than 6 weeks to get it done. Something small, knock it out, but has a big impact. The middle category are these short-term goals. Something that's going to take sort of 6 to 18 months to get actually implemented. And the way that it comes into place, the reason it may take longer is typically either the implementation time is longer. It may be that it's a foundational HR practice and you've still got compliance stuff to get figured out. It may be a resource issue. You know you need to get it done. You don't have the capacity to do it as quickly as you would like. And the other piece is sometimes this is a change management issue. Sometimes you need longer simply because you need people to have buy-in and collaboration. The long-term vision, or the things that go into your long-term goals, are going to take you closer to that 18 months to 3 years. But it's important to have these in your strategy, even though you know you may not touch them for a long time, but it helps you keep your eye on the ball as to where you're heading. And it may even frame some of the decisions you make in your immediate needs, immediate actions, and your short-term goals. Because you might tweak things to make sure, let's make sure we don't have to totally redo this in order to get where we want to get 3 years from now. Once you've got the plan and the prioritization done, now you got to figure out how to actually attack the plan. There are a couple of different ways you can go about these things. And when we do HR strategies for clients, we literally put these two symbols next to each of the recommendations, because there is absolutely stuff that you as an organization can and should do yourself. These are the things where the resource and the knowledge exists in-house, and maybe using somebody who knows the organization already really well actually gives them the subject matter expertise to do it faster and better. Those are the situations in which you're like, absolutely do these yourselves. Other reasons that something's a DIY is it's just plain easy. I have clients that we do a lot of different levels of work for, and when we do their strategies, sometimes I just say, you know what, guys, this one is better done inside. Or it's just easy, just get it done. You can have it done tomorrow and you can run with it. Save those situations where you need to hand the baton off to anyone, whether it be your employment law attorney, a consultant, even just a temporary employee that you bring in for a project. Save those for the situations where it makes the most sense. The second piece is where you hand things off. In smaller organizations, there are more opportunities and more need to hand things off to other folks so that you can keep your strategy moving forward. Like all organizations, sometimes we feel like, letting it go might actually put me further behind. I have a client right now. She wants interview guides for 3 major job families in her organization, because she knows her managers would really thrive if she could just give them a set of questions and competencies that they should be focused on. Could she do it herself? Absolutely. She is absolutely, she's strong HR background, has all the expertise to do it herself. But she also shared with me, she said, Katie, for me to get 3 interview guides with unique guides in place would take me forever. She's like, it might not even get done in the next year because I'm going to get pulled off of it. We started working with her 3 weeks ago. She will have done interview guides by the end of next week, because it's an easy project, but we can get it off her plate and be done. Those are the kinds of things you want to look for in your strategy, and then figure out, where do you hand them off? That makes the most sense. A lot of times your payroll organizations can take some of these things off. Again, external resources that are available. Who's out there to help you get stuff done? Once you've got all of these pieces in place and you've thought through the SWOT piece, the action items you want to take, the prioritization, and then the who does the work, you'll start to feel like your strategy looks less and less like it did at the beginning of the presentation. And instead, while it still may have diversions, because you will get let off the path by the fires that happen, there's a clear path for you to come out the other side with the HR organization that you want. That's the beauty of HR strategy, and stepping back from time to time to really understand what it is you need to be focused on, so that even when you get pulled away, when you come back, you're already on the right path. You just need to keep the path moving forward. I will stop there for a moment are there any questions that I can answer for folks? And again, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask the question, or feel free to, we're just the Right Cyclers group that unmuting yourself and asking is just fine, or type something into chat for me. Well, I'm waiting to see if there are any additional questions. The slide you see here on the screen is an opportunity for you to get a couple of things. First of all, if you text the word HR info to 72345, you'll get two things. First of all, I told you at the beginning, we give you a way to get a copy of this presentation so that you can access the information, use some of the resources, use these checklists as part of your SWOT analysis. So just type HR info in after you text it to that particular number. The other piece that we offer for our participants for these webinars is a free 2-hour HR strategy session. So you've heard me talk about clients that we do strategies for. Typically, that is a service we offer. That's about a $700 service. For folks that attend our free webinars, we do offer that as a free option. And so if I get your text today on this, we will call up, and even remotely, so even if you're not in St. Louis, I've done these remote very easily, and we're able to put together an HR strategy for you and come up with your recommendations and your prioritizations for you, which sends you on the right path. So again, please send, if you text to that, we will send these out after the fact. I want to take a moment to thank so much Veritable Screening. For those of you who are not familiar with them, they are an outstanding background check service. John and I worked together at Progressive Insurance for many years, and he's done an outstanding job of providing a service that allows you to get background checks completed for your new hires in a way that absolutely ensures compliance. But most importantly, the part that I just absolutely could not do enough without, because John, Veritable Screening does all of our background checks that I do for my clients, the consult and consultation that you get when you have questions, when you're not sure what the right process is, or you're not sure what the right action to take, their customer service is absolutely outstanding, and their turnaround has been by far the best I've seen in the experience. So definitely, if you don't have a background check vendor today, or you're looking to better understand your options, please reach out to Veritable Screening and get that information. Somebody did just text for that, send me a question on what that text number was again. I flipped back to this, I put it back on the screen so that you can see it, but it is, the phone number you text it to is 72345, 72345, and type in HR info. It will ask you for your email address. If you put that in, then we'll know where to send the information. Want to thank you all again for joining us today. Again, People Solutions and Veritable Screening are very excited to be able to continue to provide these opportunities. We have recorded today's session, and it will be available. We will send it out with copies of the presentations to any folks who have requested it, and it also will be placed on our website so that you can access it there as well. With that, I will leave you all for the afternoon. Thank you so much for attending, and have a wonderful day. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions regarding the information we covered today. Thank you so much.